Hello class, my name is Nayeli Garcia. This is my final research presentation about at what point does an abortion become unethical, and this is for my biology class. Let's get started. Okay, so on this first slide, we're going to identify and define the issue. The first question is, what is an abortion? In simple terms, an abortion is the deliberate termination of a pregnancy before 28 weeks of gestation. And specifically, we're talking about induced abortion because there's some other abortions that happened without the mother even knowing. For many years, there's been a huge gap in society in which people think that biological women should not be allowed to have deliberate abortions because that means they're killing a human being. And then there's the other side of people which think a woman should have the right to decide over their own bodies, or sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it comes to the health of the person or many other reasons. Basically, our main issue here is concluding whether an abortion is ethical or unethical and at what point of a pregnancy this becomes unethical. Okay, so now let's talk about the science behind why I think abortion is not an unethical practice. To start it off, a fetus does not become one until the 9 weeks of pregnancy, because before all of this, it is just a cluster of cells, as we can see in this picture right here. After the 9 weeks is when the fetus actually starts to develop their organs, their human characteristics, and they start to look more like a baby, which is not completely the point. Major development of a fetus happens by the 29th week of pregnancy, and realistically, most women that decide to have an abortion or have to have an abortion do this way before this time. Going more in depth about the science behind it, most people who argue that an abortion is unethical is mostly because of religious reasons or backgrounds. Now, on the more scientific side, those who argue that abortion is unethical at a certain point is because they're talking about the 24th to 25th week of pregnancy when a fetus does start to feel pain. And realistically, pain is more than just perception and transmission. It's a really complex phenomenon, and we have to understand that at the end of the day is the woman who decides whether they want to have an abortion or not. This takes me right to my next point, which is the relationship between this topic and the class that I'm currently taking, which is biology. I wrote some notes for this because I wanted to get it the correct way, and I'm just going to read it off of my notes. When someone gets pregnant, we're talking about the beginning of life. This course is meant to study biology, in which we study all living organisms and their behavior. In this case, we're talking about biological women and if they decide to have an abortion or not after they get pregnant. So that means that we're studying their behavior. Needless to say that in this class, we also talk about reproduction, and women go through the process of reproduction before being able to get pregnant, right? Okay, so now we're going to talk about both sides of the issue, and obviously I'm going to separate this by what I think is most obvious when it comes to abortion, which is people who are pro-life and people who are pro-choice. Alright, so the first point of this slide is those who are pro-life. Pro-life individuals are those who believe that biological women should simply not be allowed to decide over their own bodies and so on, be able to have abortions if they decide they do not want to continue with their pregnancy. I must admit that sometimes it's understandable when people decide to be pro-life instead of pro-choice just because they have a relationship to the person who wants to have an abortion, but that shouldn't determine why some states don't allow women to have abortions. Now, moving over to the pro-choice side of this slide. People who are pro-choice don't necessarily believe that abortion should be a common practice, but just more that women should be able to decide over their own bodies. And there's many factors behind this, because sometimes pregnancies aren't just because a woman doesn't want to have a baby. There's pregnancies that happen when rape happens. There's pregnancies with the fetus having abnormalities. There's pregnancies in which the mother's life is at risk and they don't obviously want to lose their lives. So yes, I understand both sides of the issue, but still believe that women should be able to decide over their own bodies. Now, when it comes to taking a stance on this topic, I know that there's a lot more information that I can research in order to have a more valuable view on this topic. However, as a woman, I believe that other women should be allowed to decide over their own bodies. I do believe that there should be some laws that prevent from women who are constantly getting pregnant and abusing of this right, because I do believe that some women use abortion as a birth control, which shouldn't be the case. But besides that, I do think that women should be able to decide over their own bodies and be able to use a right. Alright, so now I'm going to use this slide to support my stance. I have 4 major points that I want to discuss. The first one being 9 out of 10 women who decide to have an abortion do this before the 12th week of gestation. And although this is not the point, many of those who say that abortion is unethical because technically you're killing a human being before this point of pregnancy, let's remember that the fetus has not majorly developed into what would be an actual baby. If abortion wasn't ethical, then why would up to 24 states make abortion legal with only a few restrictions into the abortion policies? And let me just say that those states who do not allow pregnancies to happen are majorly conservative, and the reason behind this is for mostly religious reasons. So that's that. Now, for me, the most important of them all is the multiple reasons behind pregnancy. I think there's a lot of ignorant people out there who think a woman just wants to have an abortion because they do not want to have a baby, but there's multiple reasons behind it. A unintended pregnancy, which can be, but it's not limited to, rape, a woman being on birth control but accidentally getting pregnant, and many other things. Another thing is health concerns. As I said and mentioned before, some women's lives are at risk when they get pregnant for health reasons. And then fetal anomalies, which I've heard of many fetuses that, yes, they can be born, but some of them don't get to live that long after they're born because of anomalies that while they were conceived. In conclusion, I do think that there is a time where an abortion becomes unethical. However, most of the times in which an abortion has to take place after the recommended amount of time is because women have to, for health reasons. But at the end of the day, I still think a woman should be allowed to choose over their own body, whether society looks at it as ethical or unethical, and that's just my thought process. And last but not least, this is what my reference page looks like.